Welcome to Derby Public Schools. We are glad you're part of our team. Our vision here in Derby Public Schools is every student, every day, preparing for the future. We look forward to the skills that you bring to the district and working in collaboration with you to support our students and learning environment. Again, welcome to Derby Public Schools.
Our district has both a mission and a vision statement. We use these statements to help guide our decision-making process. We also have a strategic plan that is available for you to view on our website. We believe that a positive relationship among educational providers and a commitment to connecting with all students is paramount to a quality educational experience. As an employee of our district, you are required to receive professional development annually on the topics of blood-borne pathogens, student confidentiality, and harassment prevention. Up next, we're going to be viewing videos on each of these topics.
Welcome to this Infinitec presentation, Blood-Borne Pathogens. Special thanks to Blue Valley Unified School District 229 for contributions to this important presentation. Whether in the classroom, on a playing field, or on a school bus, all school employees must know the potential danger of blood-borne pathogens. Job classifications in school that are often at increased risk for contracting blood-borne pathogens include custodians, school nurses, job coaches, OTs and PTs, special education teachers, early childhood teachers, and paraprofessionals. Under the OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration regulations, the Bloodborne Pathogen Standard, and the Bloodborne Pathogens Compliance Directive require employers to identify the jobs, tasks, and activities that could expose employees to potentially infectious bodily fluids. The objective of this presentation is to provide you with greater knowledge of what are bloodborne pathogens, what are potentially infectious bodily fluids, how to protect yourself, and how blood and bodily fluids should be cleaned up. The potential for occupational exposure to bloodborne pathogens such as hepatitis B virus, hepatitis C virus, and human immunodeficiency virus is always present. Blood is the #1 source of these viruses in the workplace. Your risk of contracting one of these viruses at school is low because your contact with blood is infrequent. However, when the need arises, you must be prepared to deal with blood and bodily fluids safely. So what are bloodborne pathogens? According to OSHA, bloodborne pathogens are microorganisms in human blood that can cause disease in humans. The three most common are the hepatitis B virus, HBV, the hepatitis C virus, HCV, and the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV. Unfortunately, children are as prone to blood-borne diseases as adults. That means you're as much in danger of infection from the children you work with as any other group in society. The term hepatitis means inflammation of the liver. The hepatitis B virus poses greater risk to you at school than either the hepatitis C virus, HCV, or HIV, since it's more easily transmitted. The hepatitis B virus can survive for at least 1 week in dried blood on environmental surfaces such as desks, work tables, tools, broken glass, metal, doorknobs, computer keyboards, toys, and other surfaces. Environmental contamination is often responsible for the transmission of hepatitis B. This is the primary reason for the importance of properly cleaning and disinfecting any blood-contaminated surfaces. A vaccination for the hepatitis B virus has been available since 1982. The vaccine prevents hepatitis B disease and its serious consequences, and has been shown to be safe when given to infants, children, and adults. Currently, there is no vaccine for the hepatitis C virus. The hepatitis C virus, at room temperature, on normal surfaces, can survive outside the human body for at least 16 hours. 70% of hepatitis C infected persons will suffer from chronic liver disease. The hepatitis C virus is the leading cause of liver cancer and liver transplantation. It's important to understand the seriousness of the hepatitis C virus, but it's also important to realize that HCV is not spread by casual contact. Thus, shaking hands, kissing, or hugging are not behaviors that increase the risk of transmission. Unfortunately, we're also very aware there is currently no vaccine for HIV. The human immunodeficiency virus is the virus that leads to acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, or AIDS. A person can carry HIV for many years and not have any symptoms until it becomes AIDS. AIDS attacks the person's immune system, which makes it difficult for the body to fight off common diseases. When HIV-infected human blood or other bodily fluid is dried, the risk of environmental transmission is essentially reduced to zero because the virus does not survive outside the body. HIV has been found in very low quantities in the saliva and tears of some AIDS patients. HIV has not been found in the sweat of an HIV-infected person. Contact with saliva, tears, or sweat has never been shown to result in the transmission of HIV. Although exposure to blood-borne pathogens in a school environment is very limited, it's important to identify the risks and take the proper safety precautions. In general, the only time that any employee is exposed to blood-borne pathogens is when a student or coworker suffers an injury that bleeds, or there's an illness causing exposure to bodily fluids with visible blood. You could be exposed to blood-borne pathogens at the time of an injury if blood or bodily fluid splashes onto you. When administering first aid treatments, such as applying pressure to a wound, wrapping an injury, providing CPR, etc. If a work surface, such as a table, chair, or computer keyboard, is not cleaned or decontaminated immediately after an incident. You could also be exposed by cutting yourself with a contaminated sharp object like broken glass, sharp metal, a needle, a knife, or the exposed end of an orthodontic wire. Or if your job description or task includes cleanup after illness or injury. Employees working with students with special needs and/or medically fragile students should take extra caution. These students may be more vulnerable to injury, likely to have special medical needs such as feeding tubes, and/or be dependent on adults for personal care such as eating or toileting. It's important to remember that you cannot become infected with HBV, HCV, or HIV through casual contact, drinking from a water fountain, or a cough or a sneeze. How are bloodborne pathogens transmitted? Bloodborne pathogens can enter your bloodstream through a cut in the skin, abrasions or scratches on the skin, dermatitis or other skin rashes, even hangnails. The best way to prevent this from happening is to cover any open skin with a bandage while you're at work. Bloodborne pathogens can also be transmitted through mucous membranes, such as infectious material entering the eyes, nose, or mouth. Understanding that bloodborne means carried in the blood, there are other types of bodily fluids that can contain potentially infected blood. These include saliva, vomit, urine, semen, vaginal secretions, or cerebrospinal fluids. It's important to treat all blood and bodily fluids as if they contain bloodborne pathogens. With that awareness in mind, the concept of universal precautions was established. Universal precaution number one is diligent and proper hand washing as a key to infection control. Hands should be washed immediately before and after physical contact with a student when providing first aid, diaper changes, assistance with feeding, or assistance with toileting. Hands should be washed immediately after contact with blood or bodily fluids and or garments or objects soiled with blood or bodily fluids. Hands should be washed immediately after contact with used equipment such as stethoscope, emesis basin, or feeding tubes. Good hand washing keeps contamination from transferring from your hands to other parts of your body or to other surfaces you may come in contact with later. You should wash your hands with non-abrasive soap and running water for at least 20 seconds. When hand washing facilities are not available, such as on the school bus, substitute an antiseptic hand cleanser or antiseptic towelettes. Use these as a temporary measure only. You must still wash your hands with soap and running water as soon as you can. Another universal precaution includes avoiding contact with all potentially contaminated blood or bodily fluids through the use of protective barriers or PPE, personal protective equipment such as protective clothing, safety glasses, and latex or vinyl gloves. Gloves must be worn for all scenarios involving blood or bodily fluids. Staff members must wear gloves when applying bandages or putting pressure on a wound. Gloves must also be worn for any cleanup procedures of potentially infectious materials. If an emergency arises on the playground or in the hallway, and there is no time to find or put on proper protective equipment, you can create an impromptu barrier from blood or bodily fluids by using a piece of plastic, a clean garbage bag, paper, your shirt, or other items. And again, hands should be washed immediately after removing PPE such as gloves or clothing.
Turn on the water, wet your hands, apply a good amount of soap and lather up, and then focus on washing your hands for about 20 seconds, about the time it takes to sing Happy Birthday twice. Focus on washing the front of your hands, the back, in between the fingers, around the nails, and so on. And then rinse everything off. Use something to wipe your hands after that, preferably something disposable like a paper towel, and then use that to turn off the tap as well. If you get a chance, use that to also open the door to the bathroom as you're leaving.
If accidental exposure occurs, immediately wash the skin thoroughly with soap and water. If broken skin or mucous membranes are contaminated, then you should notify a supervisor or appropriate personnel immediately, document the event, and follow your district's procedures in a bloodborne pathogen exposure control plan. When dealing with bloodborne pathogens or potentially infectious bodily fluids, remember to follow the bloodborne pathogen standard precautions to enable you to respond to a situation without fear of infection. Remember to check personal protective equipment for damage before putting it on. Remember to remove PPE carefully to prevent the spread of contamination. Remember to wash thoroughly with soap and water after removing personal protective equipment, as well as any exposed skin. Remember to flush exposed eyes, nose, or mouth quickly and thoroughly with water. Remember to minimize splashing or spattering of potentially infectious materials. Remember to cover open cuts, rashes, and other broken skin. Remember to dispose of used needles carefully and immediately in assigned puncture-resistant, leak-proof containers identified by the biohazard symbol. Remember to follow cleanup procedures as instructed by your school or supervisor. Remember to clean and decontaminate pails and other reusable containers immediately after contact with potentially infectious materials. Remember to report any on-the-job exposure to blood or other bodily fluids promptly and get medical attention. Remember to place contaminated PPE, towels, etc. in closable, leak-proof containers or bags for disposal or decontamination. Let's protect ourselves by not worrying that casual contact with an infected person will transmit a bloodborne disease. Not letting fear of exposure to bloodborne pathogens keep you from helping an injured person. Not mixing contaminated clothing or linens with other laundry. Not eating, drinking, smoking, applying makeup, applying lip balm, or handling contact lenses in areas with exposure potential. Also remember, don't touch any surfaces, clothing, equipment, needles, or other sharps that may be contaminated by blood without appropriate personal protective equipment. Don't bend, recap, or remove sharps unless specifically instructed to do so. Don't ever reach by hand into a container holding sharps. Don't clean up broken glass by hand. Use tongs, a brush and pan, etc. And we're required to add, don't practice unsafe sex, inject illicit drugs, or share needles. In summary, report any exposure incidents to your supervisor immediately. Complete the forms required to properly report an exposure incident, and make arrangements for physician assessment and treatment. This concludes our Infinitec presentation, Bloodborne Pathogens, with special.
Welcome to this training on anti-harassment. As a member of our organization, it is important for you to understand our policy and our expectations for everyone's behavior. We have a strong commitment to providing safe and positive learning environments for both the students and staff in each of our programs. The goal of our anti-harassment policy is to make sure that in our schools, people feel respected by each other and treat each other well. We are in the business of educating students, and one important component in education is teaching students how to get along with others, how to treat people. As staff members, each of us is a role model of appropriate behavior. How we treat those around us communicates how much we value others, how much we value ourselves. The staff and students that you come in contact with note your behavior. Based on what they see, they make judgments about what is important to you, and by association, all of us. Based on their judgments, they then make decisions about how they will act toward others. Our organization prohibits any and all forms of sexual harassment, as well as any and all harassment based on an individual's color, race, religion, creed, ancestry, national origin, physical or mental disability, sexual orientation, or other protected group status. There are no circumstances where harassment in any form is acceptable. Rather, just as each of us wants to be valued and treated respectfully, so we must treat those around us with care and compassion. Harassment is a violation of our policy. It is also a violation of federal law. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act prohibits discrimination by government agencies that receive federal funding. Title VII states that a person cannot be discriminated against on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Title VII also prohibits opposite-sex harassment, same-sex harassment, as well as discrimination against an individual because of his or her association with another person. Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 prohibits peer sexual harassment that creates a hostile environment. So what is sexual harassment? Simply stated, it is any unwelcome verbal, physical, or visual conduct of a sexual nature. There are two common forms of sexual harassment. First, quid pro quo harassment. This form of harassment requires a person to submit to unwanted sexual behavior as a condition of employment, as a means to gain a promotion, or for students as a way to receive a passing grade. Quid pro quo is a Latin term and literally means something for something. In common usage, it means, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you. Examples include, if you have sex with me, I'll make sure you are promoted. Or, if you have sex with me, I'll give you an A in my class. The second most common form creates a hostile learning or work environment. This form of harassment interferes with the staff member's ability to do his or her job, or creates an intimidating or offensive work environment. Similarly, behavior is considered harassment if it interferes with the student's learning opportunities, the ability to participate fully in his or her education. In order to qualify as a hostile learning or work environment, there typically needs to be a pattern of behavior rather than a single event. Here are several examples of sexual harassment: forcing or attempting to force a sexual act on someone, unwanted sexual advances or touching, telling dirty jokes or talking about sex, making sexual gestures, spreading sexual rumors about a person, or rating a person's physical attractiveness. Our policy prohibits sexual harassment. It also prohibits other types of harassment and discrimination. Other forms of harassment include unwelcome verbal, physical, or visual conduct relating to a person's color, race, religion, national origin or ancestry, disability, or sexual orientation. The eye of the beholder rule is an important factor in determining what qualifies as harassment and what doesn't. Note the key point here. It is the person on the receiving end of the exchange that determines whether what was done is appropriate or inappropriate. It does not matter whether the person who made the statement or behavior intended it to be harassing or not. What matters is how the person receiving the statement or behavior experienced the interaction. So, since you don't always know how someone will respond or feel, it is important to be careful. Be sensitive to those around you. Remaining vigilant of what you say and do as you move through your workday is critically important. There are three specific components in our policy. 1. No one can harass or intimidate anyone else on school property while engaged in school activities or while doing school business. Harassment can be student to student, staff to staff, or staff to student. 2. Consistent with federal law, our policy additionally requires staff members to actively do something when they observe harassment or when harassment is reported to them by a student. When you see it or hear about it, you have to do something about it. You cannot ignore it or walk away. 3. Good faith reporting. Our policy prohibits anyone from retaliating against someone who reports harassment in good faith. However, making a malicious report against someone to get someone in trouble may be subject to disciplinary action. If you see a student being harassed, take action to stop it, and then make sure that you let the principal and/or one of the organization's human rights officers know what happened and how you handled it. If a student tells you that he or she is being harassed, support the student. Make sure he or she is safe. Help him or her talk to a clinician or administrator about the situation. Just as you have responsibilities regarding harassment, the organization has responsibilities as well. The organization's human rights officers will promptly take steps to protect students and staff members from harassment, promptly investigate all reports of harassment, and take appropriate action when the policy has been violated. Students can make a harassment report to the principal, teacher, clinician, or any staff member in the building and be assured that that person will help. If a student reports harassment to you, you must respectfully listen to the student, ensure that he or she is safe, and assure the student that you will report the incident to the principal or human rights officer. You must always report the incident. Never deal with these situations on your own. Even in instances where you doubt the accuracy of the report, you must pass the information on to the principal or a human rights officer. Some situations may violate our harassment policy and also be child abuse, which would require a DCFS hotline call. For example, a student reports that he or she has been sexually assaulted by a staff member. We are all mandated reporters. In those instances where a staff member experiences harassment, he or she can report incidents of harassment to their principal or a human rights officer. For a formal report, we ask that a written report be completed. Staff members may also choose to handle the situation less formally. Human rights officers are good resources for helping staff decide how to handle the situation. All formal reports are investigated. Some situations can be handled less formally if requested by the person making the report. The investigation may include interviews of all parties involved in the situation, as well as any witnesses. Any written evidence, like letters or drawings, may be reviewed. The human rights officers will keep the process as private as possible while still adequately investigating the situation. In student-to-student situations, the human rights officer will notify the parents if it is in the best interest of the student to do so. There is a requirement to notify parents in all situations in which a staff member is involved. Again, our goal is to provide a positive environment for all our students and employees, an environment where people respect each other and are civil towards each other. You are a critical key in making this goal a reality. Next steps are as follows. Take and pass the anti-harassment test, print out the organization's anti-harassment policy, sign the anti-harassment policy.
Welcome to this Infinitec presentation on student confidentiality. Confidentiality is equal parts ethical behavior and behavior regulation. We must think before we speak. Think before we write. Think before we reveal. Stopping to think just might prevent the illegal release of personal private information. It's our ethical and legal responsibility as educators to safeguard student information against unauthorized disclosure. This means that any information pertaining to students must not be shared with anyone other than program staff that work directly with the student, and then only if it pertains to the services they provide the student. Examples of confidential student information include information on medical conditions, disabilities, behavior, family life, grades, addresses and phone numbers, even how a student walks and talks. Whether from files, meetings, computers, school hallways, or cafeterias, and regardless of validity, this student information is private and confidential. It cannot be shared with others outside the student's team. It's against student rights and against the law. The use of data is vital to ensuring the best education for our children. However, the benefits of using student data must always be balanced with the need to protect student privacy rights. Students and their parents should expect that their personal information is safe, properly collected and maintained, and that it's used only for appropriate purposes and not improperly disclosed. All education data holders must act responsibly and be held accountable for safeguarding a student's personally identifiable information. There are 3 federal laws and 1 constitutional amendment that apply when addressing student privacy. The main law, FERPA, or the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, HIPAA, or the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and PPRA, the Protection of Pupils' Rights Amendment. This overview will only define the main law, FERPA, and its regulations for protecting confidentiality. A more detailed summary of the laws has been included in the attachments section of this presentation, found by clicking the paperclip icon in the lower right. The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act affords parents the right to have access to their children's education records, the right to seek to have the records amended, and the right to consent to the disclosure of personally identifiable information from education records, except as provided by law. When a student turns 18 years old, or enters a post-secondary institution at any age, the rights under FERPA transfer from the parents to the student, who is then known as an eligible student. FERPA defines 3 categories of information: education records, personally identifiable information, and directory information. Education records are those records that are directly related to a student and maintained by an educational agency or institution or a legally appropriate third party. In other words, any student information kept in any recorded way. Personally identifiable information is personal information that may or may not be considered confidential. For instance, a student's name is public information, but a student's social security number is extremely private. Directory information is personally identifiable information that is not generally considered harmful or an invasion of privacy if disclosed according to school district records policy. For instance, grade level, participation in sports or activities, yearbook photos, etc. Having defined the three categories of information, FERPA then defines three types of student information disclosure: authorized, unauthorized, and inadvertent. As educators, our main concern is unauthorized or unintentional disclosure. Be extremely careful where and with whom you discuss your students. The chances of being overheard are great in public areas, over the phone, in a store or restaurant, in the office, in the lunchroom, in the teacher's lounge, with staff that doesn't work with the student. The growth of electronic student data in America's education system has focused attention on the ways this data is collected, processed, stored, and used. Questions concerning privacy, security, or confidentiality are inevitable and too important to leave unanswered. The U.S. Department of Education has provided a valuable resource for providing those answers, the Privacy Technical Assistance Center, or PTAC. The PTAC is designed to provide educators with a set of tools, resources, and opportunities to receive assistance with student privacy, security, and confidentiality issues and questions. The Privacy Technical Assistance Center Help Desk can be reached by email or phone. It bears repeating, we must think before we speak, think before we write, think before we reveal. Stopping to think just might save someone's privacy. Do not share personal information, student performance, anecdotes about your student, information about the student's home life, gossip, etc. with anyone outside of the student's team. And be especially careful of where you're talking, even in the teacher's lounge. When in doubt, discuss confidentiality issues with your teacher or supervisor. This concludes our Infinitec presentation on student confidentiality. Various downloadable documents pertaining to the laws discussed in this presentation and other guidance have been included in the attachments section, accessible by clicking the paperclip icon in the lower right. If interested in continuing education credit, please take the quiz that is paired with this presentation.
Derby Public Schools has a strong social media presence. We would invite you to stay up to date with the happenings throughout the district by liking us on Facebook and following us on Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest. As an employee, we would encourage you to be mindful when posting and commenting on social media. Remember, you are representing Derby Public Schools. During your employment, you may be approached by a reporter during school working hours. Please remember that if approached, these media-related inquiries must be referred to the District Public Information Office. Derby Public Schools is a large school district with approximately 7,000 amazing students. Approximately 1,300 of those students are students with exceptionalities. That means they have an IEP, or an individualized education program. That IEP helps us to know how to meet their specified needs. We also have approximately 1,100 employees that work for the school district. Many of those employees are certified staff members, which means they are salaried, and some examples would be teachers, nurses, and psychologists. We also have lots of classified employees who make an hourly wage, and again, there are lots of examples, but some would include paraprofessionals, custodians, and bus drivers. Classified staff have a handbook which states our district policies, procedures, and benefits. We would recommend that you take time to review this information. Items that can be found include information on paid and non-paid holidays and complimentary tickets. Your name badge provides you and your immediate family free entrance to regular season home sporting events. Annually, a process called Meet and Confer is held, where representatives meet to discuss and reevaluate the items found in the handbook. Examples of changes that have come from this process include new maintenance uniforms, and individuals who have a degree now get experience credit, which enhances their hourly pay rate. Full-time employees, being those employees that work over 20 hours per week, accrue 1.33 days per month in the months of August through April. Those employees under 20 hours do not accrue any leave time. You'll get 2 personal days per year, which come from the sick leave allocation once accrued. And types of leave include sick, personal, and vacation if applicable. Under certain circumstances, employees may qualify for leave under the Family Medical Leave Act. To qualify for this leave, certain criteria have to be met. Up to 12 work weeks of unpaid leave during any 12-month period may be granted for the following reasons: birth and care of a newborn child of the employee, placement with the employee of a son or daughter for adoption or foster care, to care for an immediate family member, such as a spouse, child, or parent with a serious health condition, to take medical leave when the employee is unable to work because of a serious health condition, or to address urgent circumstances associated with the employee's spouse, son, daughter, or parents covered by active duty. Some employees may also be eligible for up to 26 work weeks of unpaid leave during a single 12-month period. We're glad you have chosen to work with us at Derby Public Schools. To accurately record your time each day and to assure that you are properly paid, you will need to contact your building or department secretary to determine the method you will be using to clock in. At this time, you should receive information on where the time clock is located. To be able to access your paycheck stubs, you'll need your login and password, which was provided on the front page of your employee access packet from the payroll department. During your first year of employment, you have 2 evaluations. Your first evaluation will occur within 60 days of employment. Your supervisor will provide more details regarding the evaluation process. Regardless of the school or department, we are all working towards one end goal of graduation. Derby is a place known for its spirit and community pride, so we invite you to show support by wearing green each Friday. As a district employee, it's important to know we have 12 schools and multiple support buildings around the district. Your safety is important to us and vital to completing your job functions. We ask that you report any potential safety concerns to your immediate supervisor. Additional tips to keep in mind are: dress appropriately for your assigned tasks, use equipment for the designed task, and make sure to ask for help if needed. Emergency safety interventions, also called ESIs, are the restraint or seclusion of a student. There are only 3 specific circumstances where a restraint or a seclusion would be permitted, and those are: the student is a danger to themselves, the student is a danger to others, or the student is causing extreme property damage. We have staff members throughout the district who have been trained in Managing Aggressive Behaviors, which is a specific program designed to help de-escalate students and, in these extreme times, to allow staff to restrain students without harming them. Our advice to you is to make sure to call for help if a restraint or seclusion is needed, and to seek the assistance of someone who is trained in managing aggressive behaviors. More importantly, we always want our focus to be on positive behavioral interventions and supports. The goal is to be proactive and to keep an emergency safety intervention from even needing to happen in the first place. Should the need arise for a restraint or a seclusion, there are specific reporting forms for you to utilize. Ask your principal for more details.
This webinar will provide you with important information regarding changes that have been made to the state statutes that govern the use of emergency safety interventions in Kansas. But first, a little history on the process around how these statutes came into being. In April of 2013, the Kansas State Board of Education passed regulations on the use of emergency safety interventions. An amended version of these regulations are still in effect and must be followed by school and district staff. You can find a document that includes both the regulations and statutes and many other useful resources on emergency safety interventions on the Kansas State Department of Education Technical Assistance System Network, or TASN, website. That is www.ksdetasn.org. I will point out this URL is also presented on the resource slide of this PowerPoint towards the end of the webinar. Once on that homepage, click on the link on the left side of the screen that is for Emergency Safety Interventions resources. Continuing on, in June 2015, statutes were enacted regarding the use of seclusion and restraints in schools. These statutes created an Emergency Safety Intervention Task Force to study and review the use of emergency safety interventions and to prepare a report for the governor and the legislature on its findings and recommendations concerning the use of those interventions. On July 1st of 2016, House Substitute for Senate Bill number 193, amending the Emergency Safety Intervention statutes, went into effect. All of the requirements of the Emergency Safety Intervention regulations and statutes, including the 2016 amendments, are the basis of this webinar. Let's now go over some of the different terms that are used throughout this webinar, and also within the context of the regulations and statutes that govern the use of emergency safety interventions. Emergency Safety Intervention Law are the requirements that relate to the use of emergency safety interventions. They include both the statutes and the regulations. The statutes are what were passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. The Freedom from Unsafe Restraint and Seclusion Act is the name of the statutes that were originally enacted in 2015 and amended in 2016 that concern the use of emergency safety interventions. The regulations are requirements adopted by the Kansas State Board of Education that have the full force and effect of law. The regulations were originally adopted in 2013, they were amended in 2016, and they will be amended in the future. Regulatory requirements refer to the requirements relating to the use of emergency safety interventions and include both statutes and regulations. Standards refer to the fact that the emergency safety intervention statutes and regulations provide a uniform standard of when an emergency safety intervention may be used. School districts are required to draft district policies that conform to the uniform standard of the emergency safety intervention statutes and regulations. There is a document on the KSDE TASN website that contains all of the standards found in the emergency safety intervention statutes and regulations. Again, this can be found at www.ksdetasn.org. The goal of this webinar is to provide you with an understanding of all the requirements concerning the use of emergency safety interventions. These basic requirements include key definitions, knowing when an emergency safety intervention may be used, the requirement of a known medical condition that could put the student in mental or physical danger as a result of the emergency safety intervention, requirements around notifying parents of an emergency safety intervention incident, an exemption as it pertains to law enforcement, requirements around meeting with the parent to discuss an emergency safety intervention incident or incidents, district policies, and school personnel training, requirements around local dispute resolution and the State Board Administrative Review, and requirements around reporting emergency safety intervention data to the Kansas State Department of Education, or KSDE. Beginning with definitions, emergency safety intervention is defined as the use of seclusion or physical restraint. Incident is defined as each occurrence of the use of an emergency safety intervention. Physical restraint is defined as bodily force that is used to substantially limit a student's movement, except that consensual, solicited, or unintentional contact and contact to provide comfort, assistance, or instruction shall not be deemed to be physical restraint. Physical escort is not physical restraint. Physical escort is the temporary touching or holding the hand, wrist, arm, shoulder, or back of a student who is acting out for the purpose of inducing the student to walk to a safe location. One of the keys here is that, in the definition of physical escort, the student is walking. Seclusion is defined as the placement of a student in a location where all three of the following conditions are met. Number one, the student is placed in an enclosed area by school personnel. This does not necessarily mean that the student is taken from point A and moved to point B. It could be that the student is in point A with others, and then the room is cleared, and the student finds that he or she has been effectively placed in seclusion. Number 2, the student is purposefully isolated from adults and peers. This means that there are no other adults or peers in the same space where the student is. And number 3, the student is prevented from leaving, or the student reasonably believes that the student will be prevented from leaving the enclosed area. It is important to understand that, as defined in the regulations and statutes, seclusion is not the same as timeout. Timeout is defined as a behavioral intervention in which a student temporarily is removed from a learning activity without being secluded. It is also important to understand that seclusion is not something that only happens when a student goes into a seclusion room or another space like a safe room. It is operationally defined as occurring whenever the student is in a school building, so long as the 3 conditions, all 3 of them, are met simultaneously. Let's move on to the definition of a parent. There are 7 definitions of a parent from the perspective of the regulations and statutes that govern the use of seclusion and restraint in Kansas. The first is a natural parent. The second is an adoptive parent. The third is a person acting as a parent as defined in KSA 72-1046, subsection D, paragraph 2. The fourth is a legal guardian. The fifth is an education advocate for a student with an exceptionality. The sixth is a foster parent, unless the student is a child with an exceptionality. And the seventh is a student who has reached the age of majority or is an emancipated minor. The school is defined as any learning environment, including any nonprofit, institutional day or residential school, or accredited non-public school that receives public funding, of which is subject to the regulatory authority of the State Board of Education. So, when may emergency safety interventions be used? An emergency safety intervention shall only be used when the student presents a reasonable and immediate danger of physical harm to self or others with the present ability to effect such physical harm. Further, the use of emergency safety interventions must stop as soon as the immediate danger of physical harm ends. Violent action that is destructive of property and presents a reasonable and immediate danger of physical harm to such students or others with the present ability to effect such physical harm may necessitate the use of an emergency safety intervention. In using an emergency safety intervention, less restrictive alternatives, such as positive behavior interventions support, must be deemed inappropriate or ineffective under the circumstances prior to an emergency safety intervention being used. Also, and importantly, emergency safety interventions must not be used for discipline, punishment, or the convenience of a school employee. There are several requirements that need to be in place anytime seclusion is used. First, when a student is placed in seclusion, a staff member must be able to both see and hear the student at all times. This includes being able to see the student when they are sitting at the bottom of the door or in a corner of the room. If the room the student may be placed in does not have the ability to see the student at all times, the school may consider installing a non-breakable mirror in order to see all parts of the room. Second, a seclusion room that has a locking mechanism as part of the door must be designed to ensure that the locking mechanism automatically disengages when the staff member watching the student walks away or in cases of emergency, such as fire or severe weather. Under no circumstances can a student be in seclusion locked without an adult actively monitoring and engaging the locking mechanism. Third, if the school uses a seclusion room, it must be a safe place, free of dangerous conditions, well ventilated, and sufficiently lighted. There are several types of restraint that are prohibited. These include face-down or prone physical restraint, face-up or supine physical restraint that obstructs the student's airway, physical restraint that impacts the student's primary mode of communication, chemical restraint, except as prescribed by an appropriately licensed person for treatment of a medical or psychiatric condition, and mechanical restraint, except when the mechanical restraint is a protective or stabilizing device that is required by law or used in accordance with an order from an appropriately licensed person, or any device that is used by law enforcement officers to carry out law enforcement duties, or seatbelts and other safety equipment used to secure students during transportation. It is important to note that law enforcement officer is now defined in the statutes and includes a campus police officer. Likewise, both chemical and mechanical restraints are defined in the statutes that govern the use of emergency safety interventions. It is important to note that an emergency safety intervention may not be used with a student if the student is known to have a medical condition that could put the student in mental or physical danger as a result of the emergency safety intervention. This applies to both the use of seclusion and restraint. The existence of such medical condition must be indicated in a written statement from the student's licensed healthcare provider, a copy of which is provided to the school and placed in the student's file. The written statement must include an explanation of the student's diagnosis, a list of any reasons why an emergency safety intervention would put the student in mental or physical danger, and any suggested alternatives to the use of emergency safety interventions. That being said, an emergency safety intervention may still be used if not using an emergency safety intervention would result in significant physical harm to the student or others. For example, if there is a student with written documentation on file that the use of an emergency safety intervention would cause mental or physical danger, but the student attempts to run out into a busy street, this student may be restrained for safety. There is a sample form on the KSDE-TASN website that schools may provide to parents, and parents can give to their child's licensed healthcare provider to document this information. Feel free to download and use this if desired. With respect to the district's responsibility to notify parents following an emergency safety intervention, the parents must be notified on the same day as the incident. The same-day notification requirement is satisfied if the school attempts to contact the parent using at least 2 methods of contact. A parent may designate a preferred method of contact to receive the same-day notification. A parent may agree in writing to receive only one same-day notification for multiple incidents occurring on the same day. There is a form on the KSDE-TASN website that districts may use to allow a parent to designate a preferred method of contact to receive the same-day notification. On that same form is a place for the school to document that the parent has agreed to receive only one same-day notification for multiple incidents occurring on the same day. This form has been provided for your convenience should you wish to use it to document these parent preferences. There is no requirement this form be filled out for all students. Written documentation of an emergency safety intervention incident must be completed and provided to the parent no later than the school day following the incident. This must include A, the events leading up to the incident, B, student behaviors necessitating the emergency safety intervention, C, steps taken to transition the student back into the educational setting, D, the date and time the incident occurred, the type of emergency safety intervention used, the duration of the emergency safety intervention, and the school personnel who used or supervised the emergency safety intervention, E, space or an additional form for parents to provide feedback or comments to the school regarding the incident, F, a statement that invites and strongly encourages parents to schedule a meeting to discuss the incident and how to prevent future use of emergency safety interventions, and G, email and phone contact information for the parent to schedule an emergency safety intervention meeting. KSDE interprets written to mean printed or electronic, and schools may group incidents together when documenting the items in letters A, B, and C if the triggering issue necessitating the emergency safety interventions is the same. There is a form on the KSDE-TASN website that districts may use to document emergency safety intervention incidents. There is also a sample letter that districts may use to notify parents of an emergency safety intervention incident. Upon the first incident in a school year, parents must be provided the following information in printed form. If a parent requests in writing that the parent be provided this information in email rather than a printed copy, the school may do that. These are what need to be shared with parents at this time. First, a copy of the standards of when an emergency safety intervention can be used. Second, a flyer on the parent's rights under emergency safety intervention law. Third, information on the parent's rights to file a complaint with their local board and the right to request administrative review by the state board. And fourth, information that will assist the parent in navigating the complaint process, including contact information for Families Together and the Disability Rights Center of Kansas. For subsequent incidents, school must provide this information to parents with a full and direct website with the information. On the KSDE-TASN website, there is a template that schools may use to fill in with specific information for parents following an incident. Schools can also use the same template to fill in with general information and post to their school or district website so that this information can be provided to parents at a full and direct website. Also, there is a form on the KSDE-TASN website that schools may use to document a parent's request to receive the information required after the first incident in a school year by email. Again, there is no requirement that this form be used for all students. KSDE anticipates that there are students that emergency safety interventions will likely be used with, based on past experience with these students. KSDE also anticipates that there are parents who might have requested in the past to receive emergency safety intervention documentation via email. District staff are welcome to inform parents of these new options available to them and their choices in these areas. District staff should feel free to discuss these things with parents, as long as parents feel like exercising any of these options are true choices and that the district is not forcing them into a certain choice. If the school is aware that a law enforcement officer or a school resource officer used seclusion, physical restraint, or mechanical restraint on a student, then the school must notify the parent the same day using the parent's preferred method of contact for emergency events. However, the school is not required to provide the documentation of the incident or the information to the parent that was specified in the previous 2 slides. The school is not required to report these incidents to KSDE. And lastly, mechanical restraint does include the use of handcuffs. New in the statutes is the exemption that campus police officers and school resource officers are exempt from the requirements of emergency safety intervention statutes and regulations when engaged in an activity that has a legitimate law enforcement purpose. However, school security officers are not exempt from the requirements of emergency safety intervention statutes and regulations. Campus police officer, school resource officer, and school security officer are defined in the law, and schools should review these definitions to make sure they understand which of their staff may or may not be exempt. The written documentation of any emergency safety intervention incident must contain a statement that invites and strongly encourages parents to schedule a meeting to discuss the incident and how to prevent future use of emergency safety interventions. Within this documentation need to be both email and phone information for the parent to contact the school to schedule the emergency safety intervention meeting. After each emergency safety intervention incident, a parent may request a meeting with the school to discuss and debrief the incident. A parent may request such meeting verbally, in writing, or by electronic means. The focus of any meeting convened is to discuss proactive ways to prevent the need for emergency safety interventions and to reduce incidents in the future. If a parent requests a meeting to discuss an emergency safety intervention incident, the meeting must be called within 10 school days. Nothing prevents a school from grouping incidents into one meeting for discussion as long as the timeline in the previous bulleted point is met. The time for calling this meeting shall be extended beyond the 10 school day limit if the parent is unable to attend within that time period. And lastly, the parent will determine whether the student shall be invited to the meeting. There are different requirements regarding the parent meeting if the student does or does not have an IEP or a 504 plan. Schools should review these requirements to make certain they understand which requirements apply in which situations. If a student with an IEP was placed in a private school by a parent and the parent requests a meeting concerning the use of an emergency safety intervention, the meeting must include both the parent and the private school. They will discuss the incident and consider whether the parent should request an IEP team meeting. If the parent requests an IEP team meeting, the private school must help facilitate such meeting. With the passing of amendments to the statutes that govern the use of emergency safety interventions comes the inevitable need to revise district policies. KSDE's expectation is that this will be completed by the beginning of the 2016-2017 school year. The revised district policy must be accessible on each school's website. It is not sufficient to be on a central district website. Additionally, the revised district policy must be included in the school's code of conduct, school safety plan, or student handbook. The revised district policy must include a schedule for when and how parents are provided with notice of the district's emergency safety intervention policy. The amendments to the regulations and statutes have not changed the school personnel training requirement. District policies must include school personnel training for all staff in requirements of emergency safety intervention law and must address both prevention and de-escalation techniques as well as positive behavioral intervention strategies. As with earlier training requirements, the level of training must be designed to meet the needs of personnel as appropriate to their duties and potential need to use an emergency safety intervention. Trainings need to be consistent with nationally recognized training programs, and the schools must maintain documentation on training provided, as well as including the list of participants. With respect to data collection and review of all instances of emergency safety interventions, district policy must establish a system by which documentation of each use of emergency safety intervention for all students for which the district is responsible is collected and maintained. This also includes students who the district has placed outside of the district, for example, in a special purpose school. It is the child's responsible school that must collect and review all emergency safety intervention data. District policy must establish a procedure by which each school will periodically review the use of emergency safety interventions for all students for which each school is responsible. Additionally, information maintained by each school on the use of emergency safety intervention must be compiled and submitted at least biannually to the district superintendent or their designee. KSDE has created this flowchart to help staff and parents understand the local dispute resolution process. Each district policy must provide for a local dispute resolution process for parents. Parents have the right to file a complaint with the local Board of Education if the parent believes that an emergency safety intervention was used with their child in violation of the emergency safety intervention statutes and regulations or the district's policy. The parent has 30 days to file this complaint from the date the parent was informed of the use of emergency safety intervention. If the parent files a complaint with the local board will then investigate the complaint. Within 30 days of the parent filing the complaint, the local board must issue a written final decision with findings of fact and any required corrective action. If the local board does not issue the decision, or if the parent is not satisfied with the decision issued, the parent may proceed to the state board's administrative review process. New to the regulations is an administrative review process by the state board. If a parent were to file a complaint with a local board and is not satisfied with the final decision about the use of an emergency safety intervention, the parent may file a request for administrative review with the state board, so long as they file within 30 days of the local board's final decision, or if the local board fails to issue a decision within 60 days of filing a complaint with their local board. At this point, the state board will designate a hearing officer to conduct a review of the local board's final decision. The hearing officer may initiate a separate investigation. The investigation results will be provided to all stakeholders within 60 days of the Commissioner's receipt of the request for administrative review. Beginning with the 2016-2017 school year, emergency safety intervention reporting will be done in the new KSDE web application, the Kansas Integrated Accountability System. As with last year, reports to KSDE must be submitted at the student level and include the KIDS ID number, whether the student had either a behavior intervention plan, IEP, or 504 plan at the time of the incident, the date and duration of the incident, and whether the incident was a seclusion or a physical restraint. More information about reporting data to KSDE can be found on the Emergency Safety Intervention page of the KSD website, which is provided on the next slide of this presentation. Here are resources that provide valuable information and templates to schools to use if desired. Schools can use the contact information on the last slide of this PowerPoint to request that they be added to the Early Childhood, Special Education, and Title Services listserv. Remember, when we think of using emergency safety interventions, the focus needs to be on prevention. KSDE does not promote the use of emergency safety interventions with any student and recognizes that there are real dangers when using emergency safety interventions. The use of an emergency safety intervention is not part of a tiered intervention plan. It is only to be used in an emergency, and because emergency safety interventions are reactive strategies, they do not decrease the likelihood of a behavior from occurring in the future. Instead, we want to focus on using proactive strategies to support students, including positive behavior interventions and supports. De-escalation is helpful to begin to identify acting out behavior early and use proactive strategies to decrease the use of both seclusion and restraint. Emergency safety interventions should not be a planned intervention for a specific student under foreseeable circumstances. Rather, behavior intervention plans should focus on the results of functional behavioral assessments and the teaching of replacement behaviors. If you find yourself planning to use either seclusion or restraint with a specific student, it means you can predict it will occur. If this is the case, every effort should be made for prevention. As we conclude, here are 4 takeaway points if you use an emergency safety intervention. First, make certain you document it. Second, make certain you notify parents. Third, make sure that you learn from it. This includes creating the time for debriefing within the team and reviewing whether all of the supports that should have been in place were in fact in place, and determining if programmatical changes may be indicated to decrease the likelihood that the need for an emergency safety intervention will occur in the future. And lastly, seek training on how to implement tiers of prevention and intervention. Should you have any further questions, please feel free to contact Laura Jurgensen or Julie Eller at the Kansas State Department of Education.
The district crisis folders are located in every room throughout the district. This folder contains details on a step-by-step process in the event of various types of emergencies. Please familiarize yourself with the location of these folders in your workplace. Automated external defibrillators are located in each building. An AED is an important portable device to utilize in the event of cardiac arrest. If you need to use this device in the case of an emergency, it provides step-by-step directions. Knowing the location of this device in your building can possibly save a life. It's important that each employee wear their district-issued name badge each day so they are easily identifiable. Each building has a secured front entrance where individuals must identify the reason for visiting and then be authorized to enter. It is important to not open the doors, but instead direct these individuals to the secured front entrances. Other safety procedures that we have in place include Skylert, which is a tool the district uses for mass communication by phone, text, and email. The contact information is pulled from Skyward. It's important that your contact information is current and up to date, so you receive messages such as school closings related to weather. All employees of the district are considered mandated reporters. A mandated reporter is legally required to ensure a report is made when abuse is observed or suspected. This report needs to be made to the Kansas Department for Children and Families, also called DCF. For assistance with this matter, please see your building principal or social worker. If you haven't already done so, please make sure to visit our payroll office to set up both your email account and your employee access account, which is also known as Skyward. If you are being set up as a substitute teacher for the district, the substitute coordinator will communicate with you the timing of when employee access, also known as Skyward, and district email will become available. Please remember that it is important that you regularly check your district email. Thanks for joining us today. This concludes our video. Please see the individual who's overseeing the completion of your orientation. We are glad that you chose Derby Public Schools.